He was a titan of industry, a man whose net worth could buy the entire city block. She was a waitress, a law student, struggling to pay for her brother's medical bills. When their worlds collided in the opulent dining room of one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, his verdict was swift and brutal. In front of a hushed crowd, he slammed his hand on the table and refused to pay, declaring her service, and by extension, her utterly worthless. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated the woman serving his water. He had no idea who she was, what she was capable of, and that her comeback wouldn't just cost him the price of a meal, it would threaten to unravel his entire empire. The air inside the Seraphine was thick with the scent of money. It smelled of truffle oil, aged leather, and the delicate, expensive perfume worn by women who had never known a day of hard labor. For Olivia Vance, it was the smell of survival. Each night she donned the restaurant's severe black uniform, a stark contrast to the vibrant, hopeful person she was outside these hallowed walls. She was a ghost in this gilded cage, gliding between tables with a practiced smile, her mind a million miles away, calculating tuition deadlines for her final year at NYU Law, and the ever-mounting cost of her younger brother, Samuel's experimental treatment for cystic fibrosis. The job was a paradox. It paid better than any other part-time gig. She could find the tips from the 1%ers, often covering a full week of Samuel's medication. But the cost was measured in dignity, in the constant swallowing of pride, as she catered to people who saw her as part of the furniture. Tonight, the pressure felt heavier than usual. A letter from the hospital had arrived that morning, its clinical language a polite but firm demand for a payment that was terrifyingly out of reach. That's when he walked in. Silas Blackwood. Even if you didn't know his name, you felt his presence. He moved not like he owned the place, but like he owned the very concept of places. He was tall and severe, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in a storm. His suit was a custom-tailored masterpiece of dark charcoal wool that probably cost more than Olivia's car. He was flanked by two younger men, Gavin and Troy, who mirrored his expensive taste, but lacked his predatory stillness. They buzzed around him, like pilot fish, laughing a little too loudly at his quiet, cutting remarks. Mr. Henderson, the restaurant manager, a man who normally walked with the stiff posture of a retired general, practically melted into a puddle of obsequious deference. Mr. Blackwood an honor as always. He gushed, leading them to the best table in the house. Table 7, a secluded corner booth with a panoramic view of the city lights. It was Olivia's section. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She had served Blackwood once before. He was a nightmare customer, infamously difficult condescending, and a notoriously poor tipper. He treated service staff like malfunctioning appliances, his words dripping with a casual disdain that was more chilling than outright anger. "Deep breaths, Liv Chloe," another waitress whispered as she passed by with a tray of empty champagne flutes. "Just smile, nod, and think of Samuel. You got this." Olivia gave a weak smile in return and approached the table, her notepad in hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Olivia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some water? We have still sparkling, or our artesian—" "Just water." Blackwood cut her off, not even bothering to look up from his phone. "Still, no lemon. Ice on the side, 3 cubes exactly, and don't hover." Gavin and Troy snickered. Olivia's smile didn't falter. "Of course, sir." The evening unfolded as a masterclass in quiet humiliation. Blackwood sent back his wine, a $900 bottle of Chateau Margaux, claiming it was corked, though the sommelier had tasted it and found it perfect. He complained that his steak, ordered medium rare, was a degree too cool in the center. He spoke about Olivia as if she wasn't there, making pointed comments to his companions about the quality of help these days. "It's a question of value, you see," he pontificated, swirling the second, acceptable bottle of wine in his glass. "In my world, we divest from non-performing assets. We cut away the fat. You don't reward mediocrity, you eliminate it. This principle applies to everything from a multi-billion-dollar acquisition to the person pouring your water." Olivia felt a hot flush of anger creep up her neck, but she pushed it down, focusing on the image of Samuel's smiling face in his hospital bed. That smile was her shield. For that smile, she could endure anything. She refilled their glasses with perfect precision, cleared their plates with silent efficiency, and maintained a facade of serene professionalism. Finally, after they had finished their desserts and a round of obscenely expensive scotch, the moment arrived. Olivia placed the leather-bound bill folder gently on the table. The total was staggering, $2,478.50. A good tip, even a standard 20%, would cover the hospital's demand entirely. A wave of nervous hope washed over her. Maybe, just maybe, despite his behavior, he would be generous. Blackwood let the bill sit for a long, agonizing 10 minutes. He continued his conversation, ignoring it as if it were a speck of dust. Finally, with a theatrical sigh, he opened it. He stared at the total for a moment, his lip curling into a sneer. He then looked up, his cold grey eyes locking onto Olivia's for the first time all evening. The intensity of his gaze was startling. It was a look of utter, dismissive contempt. He reached into his wallet, but he didn't pull out a credit card. He pulled out a single crisp $1 bill and placed it on the tray. Then he slowly, deliberately stood up. Gavin and Troy followed suit, a confused but compliant look on their faces. "Sir," Olivia asked, her voice barely a whisper, "is everything all right with the bill?" Blackwood let out a short, humorless laugh. It was a sound like ice cracking. "The bill is an invoice for services rendered," he said, his voice low, but carrying across the now hushed nearby tables. "It implies a service was in fact provided." He gestured vaguely in her direction, a flick of the wrist that was more insulting than any curse. "What I received tonight was not service. It was a series of barely competent actions performed by someone who adds no value whatsoever." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper for all to hear. "I don't pay for worthless assets, sweetheart. And she," he announced to the room, his voice rising again, "is worthless." He turned on his heel and began to walk away, leaving the check, the single $1, and Olivia's shattered composure in his wake. The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Worthless. It echoed in the sudden cavernous silence of the restaurant. The gentle clinking of silverware stopped. The low hum of conversation died away. Every eye in the vicinity was now fixed on table 7, on the single $1 bill, lying next to a $2,478.50 check, and on the young waitress standing frozen beside it. Olivia felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp, painful gasp. The meticulously constructed wall of professional detachment she wore like armor every night had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public execution of her dignity. The heat of humiliation crept up her neck, painting her cheeks a deep, burning crimson. She could feel the stares of the other patrons, some pitiful, some morbidly curious, some secretly relieved. It wasn't them. Mr. Henderson scurried over his face, a mask of panicked placation. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, please, is there a problem? Whatever it is, we can resolve it." Blackwood paused at the edge of the dining room, turning slowly with an air of profound irritation, as if he were being bothered by a gnat. "The problem, Henderson," he said, his voice resonating with cold authority, "is that I will not subsidize incompetence. I came here for a premier dining experience, and I received service that wouldn't pass muster at a roadside diner. The wine was mishandled, the food was served with a distinct lack of enthusiasm, and I was subjected to the presence of a waitress who clearly has no business being in an establishment of this caliber." He looked directly at Olivia again, and a cruel smirk played on his lips. "I am leaving $1, a symbolic payment for the water she managed not to spill on me. Consider it a lesson in market value. Send me the bill for the food. My office will review it. But for the so-called service charge, absolutely not. And there will be no tip." Mr. Henderson's spine seemed to dissolve. He wrung his hands, his eyes darting between the formidable figure of his most influential patron and the devastated employee he was supposed to protect. The choice for him was simple. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. I understand completely," he said, his voice slick with appeasement. "I apologize profusely for any lapse in our standards. Please be my guest for the evening. There's no need to review the bill. The meal is on the house. We value your patronage too much." He was writing off a nearly $2,500 bill to placate a bully. Olivia watched in stunned disbelief. He hadn't defended her. He hadn't questioned Blackwood's absurd claims. He had validated them, throwing her under the bus to save himself from a moment of discomfort. Blackwood gave a curt, satisfied nod. "A wise decision, Henderson." He cast one last, lingering look of disdain at Olivia. "See, that's how you handle a non-performing asset." With that, he and his sycophantic entourage swept out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of stunned silence and the lingering stench of their arrogance. The moment the door closed, the ambient noise of the restaurant rushed back in, but it sounded different now, strained and awkward. People began whispering, glancing at Olivia with a mixture of pity and judgment. To them, she was no longer a person. She was the subject of tonight's dinner theatre. Mr. Henderson turned to her, his face now a thundercloud of misplaced anger. "What did you do?" he hissed, his voice low and furious. I didn't do anything," Olivia stammered, her voice trembling. "I served him just like any other customer. He was difficult from the moment he arrived." "You don't get it, do you?" Henderson snapped, snatching the bill from the table. "That was Silas Blackwood. He sits on the board of the hospitality group that owns this restaurant. His word could get me fired. It could get this entire place audited into oblivion. You were supposed to be perfect. You were supposed to be invisible. Instead, you managed to cost us $2,500. He crumpled the bill in his fist. "This is coming out of your pay," he said, though he knew it was an illegal and empty threat. It was a statement of power, a way to shift the blame. "Go to the back. Chloe can cover your remaining tables. I don't want to see your face on the floor for the rest of the night." He didn't wait for a reply. He stormed off toward his office, leaving Olivia standing alone, the $1 bill still sitting on the tray like a final mocking insult. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about the lost tip that she so desperately needed. It was about the word. Worthless. It was a brand seared onto her by a man who wielded his power like a club. He had judged her, condemned her, and dismissed her entire existence in a single venomous breath. And her boss, the person who should have defended her, had eagerly held her down while he did it. The combined weight of the insult and the betrayal was suffocating. She felt small, invisible, and utterly completely alone in a room full of people. With numb fingers, she picked up the tray. Her eyes fell on the pristine, crisp dollar bill, a symbol of her market value, he'd said, her worth. Something inside her, something that had been bent and battered all night, didn't break. It snapped. The walk to the staff locker room felt like a mile-long march of shame. The sympathetic glances from her co-workers Chloe's whispered, "Are you okay?" The averted eyes of the kitchen staff, it all blended into a symphony of humiliation. Olivia didn't respond. She moved like an automaton, her mind a maelstrom of replayed insults and her manager's craven capitulation. In the cramped, fluorescent-lit break room, she sank onto a hard plastic chair. The cheerful chatter of the other staff on their break seemed to be coming from another planet. She stared at the scuffed linoleum floor, Blackwood's voice echoing in her head. Worthless. The word wasn't just an insult, it was a verdict on her entire life at that moment. She was juggling a full course load at one of the country's top law schools, pulling double shifts in a demanding job and bearing the emotional and financial weight of her family's crisis. Every ounce of her energy was poured into being worth something, a good daughter, a supportive sister, a promising student. And in one fell swoop, a man who knew nothing about her had declared all of her to be of no value. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her mum. Hospital called. Dr. Evans wants to try the new inhaled antibiotic for Sammy. Says it has a better success rate. Insurance won't cover it. The first month's supply is $200 to $800 out of pocket. Olivia's heart plummeted into her shoes. $200 to $800. It was an impossible number. The tip she had been counting on tonight, the nearly $500 she had desperately hoped for, would have been a significant step toward that goal. Now it was gone, replaced by a single dollar and a gaping $2,500 hole in the restaurant's nightly earnings that her manager would hold over her head for weeks. A wave of despair so profound it was nauseating washed over her. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, she believed Blackwood. Maybe he was right. What was she doing, serving entitled tyrants, while her brother fought for every breath, drowning in debt to get a degree that felt 1,000,000 years away from helping anyone? Maybe she was worthless, ineffective, a failure. She leaned her head against the cold metal of a locker, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over, hot and silent. She cried for Samuel, for his stolen childhood and his uncertain future. She cried for her parents, who had already sacrificed so much, and she cried for herself, for the bone-deep weariness and the feeling of being utterly trapped. Chloe found her there a few minutes later, holding a glass of water. She sat down beside Olivia, not saying a word, just offering a comforting presence. "Henderson's a coward," Chloe said, finally, her voice laced with anger. "And Blackwood is a monster. This isn't on you, Liv. None of it is." "He made me feel so small," Olivia whispered, her voice hoarse, like I was nothing more than an insect he could crush without a second thought. "He's the one who's small," Chloe insisted. "People like that, they don't have power, they just have money, and they use it to hide how empty and pathetic they really are." Chloe's words were a balm, but the wound was deep. The despair lingered. She could quit. She could walk out right now and never set foot in this place again. The thought was tempting, a sweet release. She could find another job another way. But the reality was grim. No other place would offer this kind of earning potential, and she needed the money. She needed it now. Quitting wasn't an escape. It was a surrender. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The tears stopped. The raw, burning hurt began to cool, and in its place, something else began to form. It was a cold, hard knot of anger. No, not just anger. It was indignation, the righteous fury of the wrongly accused. She was Olivia Vance. She was in the top 10% of her class at NYU Law. She had argued and won cases in moot court against some of the brightest minds in the country. She could dissect a legal argument in her sleep and draft a contract airtight enough to be a work of art. She had spent the last 6 years of her life studying the very concepts of value contracts, liability, and defamation. And a man like Silas Blackwood thought he could publicly declare her worthless and walk away without consequence. A new kind of energy surged through her, displacing the despair. It was the familiar, focused adrenaline that hit her before a major exam or a mock trial. Her brain, the part of her that Blackwood had so casually dismissed, began to fire on all cylinders. He had framed his entire argument in the language of business and law. Services rendered, non-performing asset, market value, implied contract. He thought he was being clever, using his world to diminish hers. But he had made a fatal error. He had brought the fight to her turf. He just didn't know it. "I need to go back out there," Olivia said, her voice suddenly clear and steady. Chloe looked at her confused. "What, Liv? No. Henderson told you to stay in the back. Just go home. Forget this night ever happened." "I'm not going to forget," Olivia said, standing up. Her posture had changed. The slump of defeat was gone, replaced by a straight-backed resolve. He didn't just refuse to pay a tip. He made a public declaration. He defamed me. He breached the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. He created a hostile environment. She started pacing the small room, her mind racing, connecting legal doctrines to the events of the night. He wanted to give me a lesson in market value. Fine. I'm going to give him a lesson in the law. She looked at Chloe, and for the first time since Blackwood walked in, a small, dangerous smile touched her lips. He wanted to treat this like a business transaction. Let's treat it like a business transaction. She smoothed down her uniform, straightened her apron, and took a deep, steadying breath. The waitress was gone. The law student had taken her place. She wasn't going back out there to plead or to cry. She was going back to present her case. Olivia walked out of the staff area and back into the main dining room. The change in her demeanor was palpable. She moved with a purpose and poise that made heads turn. She wasn't the shuffling, humiliated waitress who had left the floor minutes earlier. She walked with the measured, confident stride of a litigator approaching the bench. She bypassed her station and headed directly toward the front entrance, where Silas Blackwood and his companions were waiting for the valet to bring their car around. Mr. Henderson was with them, still engaged in his sycophantic damage control. "Mr. Blackwood." Olivia's voice cut through the air, clear and strong. It held no trace of tears or timidity. It was a voice of pure, unadulterated command. All four men turned to look at her. Blackwood's face soured with annoyance. "What is it now? Have you come to beg for the tip you so clearly don't deserve?" Mr. Henderson's eyes widened in horror. "Olivia, go back to the kitchen now. That's an order." Olivia ignored her manager completely, her focus locked on Blackwood. "No, sir," she said calmly. "I've come to discuss the terms of your transaction. You framed your refusal to pay in the language of business and value. I found the lecture fascinating, so I'd like to continue the discussion on those terms if you don't mind." A few patrons who were leaving the restaurant paused to watch, intrigued by the unfolding drama. Gavin and Troy exchanged amused glances, expecting their boss to verbally annihilate her. Blackwood crossed his arms, a smirk of condescending curiosity on his face. "This should be amusing. By all means, enlighten me. You stated that you don't pay for worthless assets." Olivia began, her tone even and academic. "Let's analyze that. The basis of any transaction in this establishment is an implied contract. You order food, we provide it to a certain standard, and you pay for it. You claimed a breach of that contract based on my service. She took a step closer. To justify that breach, the service would have to be so negligent as to have caused you material harm, or to have fundamentally altered the product you received. Did I spill anything on you? Did I get your order wrong? Did I cause a scene or use offensive language? Your incompetence was offensive, Blackwood sneered. That's a subjective assessment, not a material breach. Olivia countered instantly, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. Legally, your argument is baseless. You consumed the product, the food and wine, in its entirety. By doing so, you accepted the terms of the implied contract. Your refusal to pay for the service portion is a breach on your part, not mine. She wasn't finished. Now let's move on to your specific insult. You publicly declared me worthless. That's not just an opinion. It's a public statement of fact intended to harm my professional standing. That Mr. Blackwood is the textbook definition of slander per se. You didn't say, I think her service is worthless. You said, she is worthless. You attacked my person, not just my performance in a public forum which has directly impacted my earnings and professional reputation. Blackwood's smirk faltered slightly. This was not the tearful pleading he had expected. But let's stick to your preferred topic value. Olivia continued, her voice gaining momentum. You wanted to teach me a lesson about my market value, which you assessed at $1. Let's do a more accurate calculation, shall we? She began to tick points off on her fingers. I am a full-time student at the NYU School of Law, one of the top 10 law schools in the nation. The tuition room and board for my Juris Doctor degree is approximately $105,000 per year. Over 3 years, that's an investment of $315,000. I am currently in the top 10% of my class, which gives me a certain projected market value. She looked him dead in the eye. The average starting salary for a junior associate at a top-tier New York law firm, the kind your company Blackwood Capital keeps on retainer, is around $225,000 per year. Let's add in the signing bonus, which can be upwards of $20,000. So in less than a year, my market value will be $250,000 annually, with a projected lifetime earning potential well into the tens of millions. The silence was now absolute. The valet had pulled up with a gleaming black Bentley, but no one moved. This job, Olivia said, gesturing to her uniform, is what funds that investment. The tips I earn are not handouts. They are venture capital. They are the seed money for my future. Tonight you didn't just refuse a tip. You attempted a hostile takeover of my life, attempting to devalue my assets and undermine my enterprise with a public and malicious declaration. She took the final devastating step. So no, Mr. Blackwood, I am not worthless. I am a high-yield investment, and the service you received tonight was provided by a future corporate litigator who currently has a 4.0 GPA in contract law and torts. Given that I'd say you received the most valuable overqualified service of your entire life. You didn't just get a waitress. You got a legal consultation on the rudiments of contract and defamation law free of charge. My billable rate in 2 years will be $800 an hour. Your meal took approximately 2 hours. So you could say you owe me $1,600 for the legal education alone. She paused, letting her words sink in. The faces of Gavin and Troy were slack-jawed with disbelief. Mr. Henderson looked like he might faint. Silas Blackwood's face, for the first time, was drained of its color and smug superiority. He was utterly, completely stunned into silence. You are right about one thing, Olivia concluded, her voice now quiet but resonant with power. A lesson was taught here tonight. But you have mistaken the student for the teacher. Keep your $1. I'll consider it a down payment on the apology you owe me." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the Bentley's engine at the curb. Silas Blackwood stood speechless, his mind reeling. He had been verbally and intellectually disarmed. The simple power dynamic he relied on, wealth over service, dominance over submission, had been inverted with breathtaking precision. He, a titan of venture capital, had been outmaneuvered, his own logic and language used as a weapon against him. His face cycled through a series of emotions, shock, fury, and then, most terrifyingly for him, a sliver of naked vulnerability. Before he could muster a response, a new voice entered the fray. It was calm, measured, and carried an unmistakable weight of authority. "She's absolutely correct, you know." All heads turned toward the source. A man in his late 60s was stepping out of the restaurant's shadow. He was impeccably dressed in a classic navy suit, his silver hair neatly combed. He held himself with an easy grace, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, were fixed on Silas Blackwood. There was a flicker of recognition and something else in Blackwood's expression. The man walked forward and stood beside Olivia, not in a way that shielded her, but in a way that reinforced her position. He gave her a brief, approving nod, before turning his full attention back to Blackwood. "That was quite the performance, Silas." The man said, his tone casual, but edged with steel. "Though I must say, it's a step down from your usual boardroom theatrics." Blackwood's face paled further. "Robert, what are you doing here?" he stammered. The man, Robert Sterling, a senior partner at Sterling and Finch, one of the most powerful and respected law firms in the country, smiled thinly. "I was having dinner, celebrating a win in court today. It was a rather pleasant evening, until your little display of brutishness disturbed the peace. I've been sitting over there by the window watching this entire sordid affair unfold." He gestured toward Olivia. "This young woman has just given you a free and remarkably eloquent summary of several key legal points. Slander per se is a tricky thing, Silas, especially when there are a dozen witnesses. Publicly attacking someone's professional integrity, causing demonstrable financial harm, which she can prove with that hospital bill, she's no doubt stressing over it, makes for a very compelling case. A slam dunk, as they say." Gavin and Troy began to look genuinely nervous, glancing at each other with wide, panicked eyes. This was no longer just an arrogant spat. It had escalated into something with real legal teeth, and a legendary legal shark had just smelled blood in the water. Sterling took another step closer to Blackwood, his voice dropping. "But what I find most fascinating, Silas, is the hypocrisy. You of all people talking about worthless assets." He let the words hang in the air. "I seem to recall a young man about 25 years ago, a scholarship kid from the wrong side of town, with a half-baked tech idea and holes in his shoes. He was brilliant but arrogant, and he'd been rejected by every venture capital firm in the city. He was on his last dollar, about to give up." Sterling's eyes bored into Blackwood's. "Do you remember who took a chance on him, who saw past the rough exterior and gave him a $50,000 seed investment when everyone else said he was worthless? It was my late partner, Jonathan Finch. He did it against my advice, I'll admit. He saw a spark in that desperate young man. That man, of course, was you, Silas." The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The story whispered in the rarefied air of New York's elite circles, but rarely spoken aloud, was now laid bare on the pavement outside the Seraphim. Silas Blackwood, the self-made billionaire who preached a gospel of ruthless self-reliance, had started with a handout, a lifeline from a man who chose to see value where others saw none. Jonathan believed that a person's worth isn't determined by their current circumstances, but by their potential and their character. Sterling continued, his voice laced with disappointment. It seems you've learned nothing from his generosity. You've become the very thing he fought against, a man who measures human beings on a balance sheet. He would be ashamed of you tonight. Silas Blackwood looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He was exposed, his carefully crafted persona of an invincible titan stripped away to reveal the insecure, desperate young man he once was. He looked at Olivia, then at Sterling, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shame. The predator had become the prey. Without another word, he turned, shoved past his two stunned associates, and got into his waiting Bentley. "Drive!" He barked at the driver, and the car sped away into the night, leaving Gavin and Troy standing awkwardly on the curb. Robert Sterling watched the car disappear, a grimly satisfied look on his face. Then he turned to Olivia. The sternness in his eyes softened, replaced by a look of genuine admiration. "Olivia Vance, you said your name was," he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied, her heart still pounding in her chest. "NYU Law, top 10%, he recited. "Impressive, but what you did just now, that can't be taught in a classroom. That was courage. That was integrity. That was the instinct of a true advocate." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek, heavy business card. "Robert Sterling, Senior Partner, Sterling and Finch. My firm runs a summer associate program," he said, holding the card out to her. "It's highly competitive, but I believe in investing in talent, especially when it's accompanied by a strong moral compass. Consider this a formal invitation to apply. In fact, don't even apply. Call my office tomorrow. The position is yours if you want it." He paused, a twinkle in his eye. "And we'll make sure the salary covers any and all outstanding medical bills. Jonathan would have insisted on it." Olivia stared at the business card in her hand. The embossed letters felt heavy, significant, as if the card itself held the weight of a transformed future. Sterling and Finch. It was a name that commanded reverence in the legal world, a firm that first-year law students only dreamed of entering. And the man who had just dismantled Silas Blackwood with a story from the past was offering her a place there. The world which had felt so hostile and crushing just minutes before suddenly tilted on its axis. The immediate suffocating anxiety about Samuel's medication, her tuition, her very survival, began to recede, replaced by a dizzying, electrifying hope. Behind her, Mr. Henderson was in the midst of a spectacular change of heart. His face, which had been pale with fear, was now flushed with a desperate need to align himself with the new power dynamic. "Miss Vance Olivia," he said, rushing to her side. His voice was dripping with a synthetic sweetness that made Olivia's stomach turn. That was simply incredible. I had no idea. You handled that situation with such professionalism. I was just playing along with Mr. Blackwood to de-escalate the situation, you see. A tactic. But I was on your side the entire time. The entire time." Olivia turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. She said nothing. Her silence was more damning than any accusation. "Please," he stammered, "forget what I said about your pay. That was just the stress of the moment speaking. You are a valued member of our team, an exemplary employee." Robert Sterling arched an eyebrow. "Is that so, Henderson?" "Because from where I was sitting, it looked a lot like you were about to let a bully not only walk out on a significant check, but also publicly humiliate one of your staff members without a word of protest. My firm has several corporate accounts with your parent company. I'm sure they'd be interested to hear about the tactics you employ for managing customer relations and employee welfare." Henderson's face went white as a sheet. "No, that won't be necessary, Mr. Sterling. I assure you Miss Vance will be fully compensated for the inconvenience, and the restaurant will of course cover Mr. Blackwood's bill. No losses will be passed on to her. I'll see to it personally." The two junior associates, Gavin and Troy, who had been left behind by their boss, now looked completely lost. They approached hesitantly. We're so sorry about all that," Gavin mumbled, unable to meet Olivia's eyes. "Silas, he gets like that. It was out of line." "We'd like to take care of the bill," Troy added, quickly pulling out a platinum credit card. "And the tip, of course. Please." They seemed less motivated by genuine remorse and more by a desperate fear of being associated with their boss's downfall, especially in front of a man like Robert Sterling. Olivia simply nodded, took the card and processed the payment, adding a 25% tip, nearly $620. It was more than she'd hoped for at the start of the night. As she handed the card back, the other patrons who had been watching the entire exchange broke into a spontaneous round of applause. It started with a few tables and quickly spread through the dining room. It was a wave of validation, a collective acknowledgement of her courage. People smiled at her no longer with pity, but with genuine respect. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from pride. After the two disgraced associates scurried away, Sterling turned back to Olivia. "You've handled this entire night with more grace and fortitude than most seasoned lawyers I know," he said warmly. "My offer stands. Call my assistant Catherine. She'll be expecting you. We'll start you as soon as you can get your paperwork in order. A paid internship, of course, with a stipend that will make this job entirely optional for you." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but these were tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say. Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said with a kind smile. "Thank your own strength, and thank Jonathan Finch. He always had a knack for finding diamonds in the rough. I'm just trying to keep his legacy alive." He glanced at his watch. "Now I should be going. I expect to see you at Sterling and Finch very soon, Miss Vance." He gave her a final respectful nod and walked out to his own waiting town car. Olivia stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the cool night air feeling fresh and clean on her face. In her pocket was a receipt for a $620 tip. In her hand was a business card that represented a complete paradigm shift in her life. She had walked into the Seraphine that evening as a waitress, struggling and invisible. She was walking out as a future associate of one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. She had faced down a millionaire, defended her own worth, and in doing so had unlocked a door she never even knew existed. She thought of Samuel and the $2,800 for his medication. It was no longer an insurmountable mountain. It was just a number, and for the first time in a very long time, she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to be okay. 3 months later, the city looked different from the 54th floor. From the window of her spacious, startlingly quiet office at Sterling and Finch, the endless grid of Manhattan wasn't an intimidating maze of challenges, but a landscape of pure electrifying possibility. The view was a constant, tangible reminder of how far she had come. The relentless, bone-deep exhaustion of her old life had been replaced by a new kind of fatigue, the satisfying ache of a mind stretched to its limits of a spirit engaged in work that mattered. The severe black waitress uniform, a garment that had felt like a second skin of subservience, was a distant memory. Today, Olivia wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit that she had bought with her first paycheck, an armor of her own choosing. The air in her office, a mix of old leather-bound books, the faint hum of a high-powered computer, and the rich aroma of fresh coffee, was the scent of her future. A stack of legal briefs sat neatly on her desk, beside a highlighted copy of the U.S. Federal Sentencing Guidelines. She had just spent the last 48 hours buried in discovery documents for a complex insider trading case, cross-referencing thousands of emails and financial statements to find a single damning piece of evidence. And she had found it, a cleverly disguised email, a digital needle in a haystack that broke the case wide open. A firm but gentle knock sounded on her door. Robert Sterling entered, holding the very research memo she had submitted just that morning. He had a rare, genuine smile on his face. "Miss Vance." He began his voice, holding its usual resonance of authority, but softened with warmth. "I just finished reading your analysis." He tapped the memo. "This is not the work of an intern. This is the work of a third-year associate. Your attention to detail is remarkable, and your logical through-line, it's impeccable. You didn't just find the evidence. You built an ironclad narrative around it. The senior partners are already buzzing." Olivia felt a flush of pride, so different from the hot blush of humiliation she'd once known so well. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. The patterns were there, it just took some digging." "Don't be modest," he said, waving a hand. "Talent like yours deserves acknowledgement. You have a gift for seeing what others miss. It's the same instinct I saw in you that night at the Seraphine. You saw the legal argument when everyone else just saw a confrontation." He paused, his expression turning more paternal. "I trust you're settling in well. The environment here can be intense." "It's the most challenging thing I've ever done," Olivia admitted honestly. "And I've never felt more at home. Thank you again for the opportunity." "The opportunity was all yours, Olivia. You earned it long before I stepped in," he said, giving her a respectful nod before leaving her to her work. As the door clicked shut, Olivia leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. The validation was intoxicating. It wasn't just praise, it was confirmation that she belonged here. The imposter syndrome that had nipped at her heels for the first few weeks had finally begun to recede. She had learned that the skills honed in the chaotic high-pressure environment of a high-end restaurant, reading a table's mood, in a glance, juggling a dozen tasks under extreme pressure, maintaining a calm exterior when all you want to do is scream, were surprisingly transferable to corporate law. Both worlds were about managing difficult people and exceeding high expectations. The only difference was that here, she was valued for her mind, not her invisibility. Her personal phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. The screen lit up with a picture of her mother. "Hi, Mom," she answered, her voice instantly lighter. "Liv, honey, I have wonderful news." Her mother's voice was bright, almost bubbly, a tone Olivia hadn't heard in years. "We just left Dr. Evans' office. Samuel's latest spirometry test. His lung function is up by 15%. 15. The doctor said he's never seen such a rapid improvement with this medication. He's breathing easier. He has more energy. Oh, Liv, he was chasing a soccer ball in the park yesterday. He hasn't done that since he was 9. Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes, hot and immediate. These were not the tears of despair or humiliation she had shed in the restaurant break room, but tears of profound, soul-shaking relief. The image of her little brother, his face usually pale with effort, running freely under the sun, was more beautiful than any city skyline. "That's the best news I've ever heard, Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's all because of you, honey," her mother said, her own voice cracking. "This treatment, this chance, you gave it to him. We all did it, Mom. We're a team. You're our champion, Olivia. Don't you ever forget that." After they hung up, Olivia swiveled her chair to face the window again, staring out at the city with blurred vision. The $2,800 that had once seemed like an insurmountable peak was now a footnote. The firm's generous salary and comprehensive health insurance plan had not only covered Samuel's new medication, but had also allowed her parents to quit their second jobs to spend more time with him. The crushing weight of financial desperation, a burden she had carried for so long she'd forgotten what it was like to be without it was gone. A knock on her door, this one more familiar and playful, announced the arrival of Chloe, holding a large, grease-spotted paper bag. "Special delivery for the Legal Eagle," Chloe announced, her grin as wide as ever. "I come bearing pad thai and premium-grade gossip." Olivia laughed, wiping her eyes quickly. "You're a lifesaver. I was about to order a sad desk salad." As Chloe unpacked the food onto a corner of the massive desk, she looked around the office in awe for the 10th time. "I swear I'll never get used to this. To think you used to be hiding from Henderson in a closet-sized break room. Speaking of which, you will not believe what happened last week." Chloe launched into a detailed, hilarious account of how Mr. Henderson, now jumpy and paranoid, had comped a meal for a table of tourists because he overheard one of them was pre-law and had a litigious look in his eye. The staff now referred to any difficult customer as a code Vance. "You're a legend there," Chloe said, mixing her noodles. "A cautionary tale for arrogant jerks and cowardly managers everywhere. You have no idea the number of waitresses from other restaurants who have come in asking if the story about you is true. You're like a folk hero." "That's ridiculous," Olivia said, blushing. "It's the truth," Chloe insisted. "But that's not the big news. The real story dropped this morning. Have you seen the business section?" Chloe slid her phone across the desk, an article from the Wall Street Journal already pulled up. The headline was a cannonball. "Blackwood Capital faces hostile takeover bid amidst founder's reputational crisis." Olivia's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She read the article, her eyes scanning the dense paragraphs. It detailed how a rival firm, sensing weakness, had launched an aggressive bid to seize control of Blackwood's empire. The reporter cited a catastrophic drop in investor confidence, quoting anonymous sources from within Blackwood Capital. One source mentioned Blackwood's increasingly erratic and arrogant behavior, while another spoke of a series of damaging public incidents that have called his judgment and character into question. The final paragraph was the most telling. A prominent market analyst was quoted, "In this day and age, a CEO's personal brand is one of the company's most significant assets. When that brand becomes toxic, as Blackwood's has after a viral story about his gross mistreatment of service staff went public, it becomes a liability." He devalued his own stock not through a bad investment, but through a catastrophic failure of character. The sharks are circling because he's bleeding, and the wound is entirely self-inflicted. Olivia put the phone down slowly. She felt no joy, no triumphant surge of revenge. It was something deeper, more clinical. It was the quiet, satisfying click of a puzzle piece falling into place. She thought of Blackwood's sneering face as he called her a non-performing asset. He had viewed the world and everyone in it through that single brutal lens, and now the market he worshipped was applying that very same lens to him. His character was a non-performing asset. His reputation had become a liability. He was being divested. "He got what he deserved," Chloe said with satisfaction. "It's not karma," Olivia said softly, more to herself than to Chloe. "It's a market correction. He built an empire on the perception of value, but he never understood its true source. Robert Sterling told me a story about how Blackwood himself was once a desperate kid with nothing, how his mentor took a chance on him because he saw his potential, his character. Blackwood forgot that lesson. He thought his worth was in his money, his power. But it was all a house of cards. His real worth, his reputation, his integrity, his humanity, he bankrupted that himself long ago." She looked away from the article and back out the window. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the city. She thought about the word worth one last time. It wasn't a price tag someone else could slap on you in a moment of anger. It wasn't a salary or a title. It was the bedrock of your character. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own integrity. It was the courage to speak truth to power, especially when your voice trembled. That night, in the gilded cage of the Seraphine Silas, Blackwood had tried to purchase her dignity for $1, but it was a flawed transaction from the start. For he had tried to buy something that was never ever for sale. That single moment of courage didn't just change Olivia's night, it redefined her entire life. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is not determined by someone else's opinion, their wealth, or their position. It is inherent. It is the sum of our resilience, our integrity, and our refusal to be devalued. Olivia's story proves that the most powerful comebacks aren't fueled by revenge, but by a steadfast belief in one's own value. She didn't just win an argument. She reclaimed her narrative and built a new future from the ashes of a single vicious insult. What did you think of Olivia's incredible comeback? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up for your own worth? Share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph and justice. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories.